Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of Veridian County, our new city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, we're going to create the city's first industrial district. In doing so, we're going to expand our highway with a new interchange and think a little bit further about the improvements to Grand Central Station. Once we've done that, we're going to spend some time expanding the farming areas of our first episode. And finally, we'll cover the entire map in districts and begin to assign some actual names to these places that we described in the first episode, so they start to have some character and we can begin to think about the precedents for each individual area. But before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with a little bit of an episode recap. In the last episode, we completely transformed our old town. This is a district that is extremely historic, and the way that we made it in the first episode just wasn't exactly what we envisioned it to be. Last episode, we recolored every single building in the district, making sure that every single building fits the theme that we want them to. We added parks to the district and transformed a number of the sidewalks and streets into old brick textures, really solidifying the classic and extremely unique historic feel that I wanted for this district. Then we created the foundations of our custom Grand Central Station, which we're going to expand upon a little bit today. This was fairly bare bones, but it's a critical part of our downtown region's infrastructure, and it integrated with the highway interchange that we built as part of the last segment of last episode, where we drew out many of the major downtown roads and began to think about the rail networks and the highways that would run through downtown. In today's episode, I want to solidify what we started last episode by creating our first industrial district. This industrial district needs to serve a few purposes for me. First, it needs to replace these random services that we have placed around on this road. These services were always meant to be temporary, but they serve an essential function in our city. I'd like to move them into a more integrated and cohesive industrial district that has a bunch of other functions, including a subway depot and a train depot that will power Grand Central Station that we built last episode. Due to our budget, we might not be able to turn these on fully immediately, but it'll be good to have them at least for now so that we can begin to draw out some of the lines and understand how it relates to the infrastructure of this area. I'd like to place an incineration plant in this district to begin to take some of the load off of our landfill that we've got going on, and I want to place a taxi depot just to continue to fill out the infrastructure for transit that we're going to need throughout the city. Of course, as an industrial district in a dense bay of an urban area, we're going to need multiple cargo harbors, ideally with connections to the rail lines that we're about to draw out, so that we really get a multimodal network of freight transport that can power Lemuria City and make it one of the major destinations for international trade on the Pacific coast. Finally, I want this industrial district to have a cargo train terminal and a passenger harbor. The cargo train terminal will seamlessly integrate with the connections to the cargo harbor, while the passenger harbor will provide essential connections for the employees of this area and for any of the surrounding uses around this industrial district. Since it's right on the water, I figure there's no better place to have a passenger harbor than somewhere right around here. Now, I just gone ahead and placed down all these assets that I'm looking at. I might have forgotten one or two, but this is a whole lot of space. And I want to squeeze all of that into basically this region right here. Plus, I want to have some basic industrial area. Not just all these individual assets, but I want to have some actual industry that we zone in. So this might be a tight squeeze. This is going to be fun. This is going to be a fun project. Just looking at the terrain here, I think I'm going to bring the highway closer and tighter into this loop so that we get a little bit of zoned industry space over here. And then I, of course, want to fill in a whole bunch of land in this bay so that we can have our cargo harbor right there. But before we start work on any of this, I think we need to take a look at some precedents from around the world so that we can get a little bit of inspiration and see the type of thing that we're going to be trying to mimic. Looking at Google Earth, here we have Old Road Bay, which is a bay in Maryland that has industrial on one side and residential on the other. This is the bay that when I was doing my initial planning, I started to take a little bit of inspiration from. I thought it might be somewhat similar to the big loop that we have in-game. Oh, look at this, they have International Order of Oddfellows. Last year, I actually did a project for them at work, or at least part of a project that hasn't actually proceeded anywhere. Anyway, just looking at this area, this seems like a pretty typical industrial area right along the water, but some of the things that I know is that they actually have to have a huge tree buffer since that's so close to the residential. So we might need to be thinking about having a number of tree buffers around our industrial area, especially if we take a look at the wind graph in game, which is something that we're going to have to do if we're smart. And this bay, at least to my thoughts, uses a lot of infill land. This infill land is something that I see really commonly in a lot of industrial areas. You'll also note that for the most part, the roads just go everywhere. There's not really a neat road grid, except in this more green area, but in the industrial area, the roads aren't very neat. It's kind of just all over the place, and you're kind of just struggling to find your way around. That's also pretty common in industrial areas. You're not used to seeing high amounts of vehicle traffic here. Ironically, given that this is a huge car storage for fresh Volkswagens and BMWs. But you're not going to see a huge amount of vehicle traffic, so the roads don't have to be organized for super high throughput. They just have to be neat enough that the trucks can drive on them, but they don't have to be super logical. Next up is Harbor Island here in Seattle. As you know, Veridian County and the City of Lemuria are taking pretty strong inspiration from Seattle, so of course we have to take a look over here. Harbor Island, much like a lot of industrial areas, has a huge amount of reclaimed land. In fact, most of this Harbor Island, is all on reclaimed land, so it's super low down to the water, but they basically took some of the islands that were here naturally, filled them all in to create more stable terrain, and then they brought in a bunch of train lines. These train lines then connect into any of the different terminals and many of the different industrial uses. Of course, you've got your big oil barrels over here, and you've got your cargo terminals. Your cargo harbors are kind of in these more protected areas. You'll see this in a lot of industrial areas. The cargo harbors are pushed inwards so that any of the waves from the main body of water don't impact cargo vessels as they're docked, and so that the cargo vessels, since they're quite large, don't take up a lot of the valuable real estate of the main body of water. Much like my goal, these cargo terminals have quite notable train connections running into them. As we noticed in Old Road Bay over in Maryland, the road connections are kind of all over the place. There's just a lot of concrete everywhere, and there's not really a defined road network besides a couple of them. For the most part, cars will just drive wherever they see fit. Next up, I want to look over here in Newark. Newark is an area I know best for its airport, since I fly into there pretty often when I visit New York. Of course, it's got, off topic a little bit here, one of my favorite spaghetti messes over here, but it's right next to their main cargo terminal. You can see there's just so many of these cargo trains over here. The containers are just endless. When you're flying into the airport, you just can't stop seeing all of these cranes forever. Just like Old Road Bay, you got industrial on one side and residential on the other, although over here they don't do a very good job of screening the residential area from the potential pollution of the cargo harbor. But much like all of the others, this is in a more secluded bay that's further from the water area, so there's not as many waves that might impact the cargo functions, and there's a lot of reclaimed land, so you get these artificial islands with more sharp corners that are connected at somewhat weird points, and many of them have some sort of train connection that runs into them. Lastly, before we head into game and begin to build ourselves, I wanted to take a look at my previous industrial district that I made. Definitely not perfect. I built this in Commons County. This is one of the episodes from a few months ago, which you can still check out on my channel if you wanted to go and watch that series. Although I'm doing content a little bit differently now, it's still a good video. It's still a really fun project that I worked on, and I really enjoyed that. But very much like the project that we're working on today, there are a few main goals that we had in this project. Infill land, cargo harbor, general industrial zoning, lots of parking, kind of crazy roads, and train lines. This one is right next to the airport, so it's somewhat like Newark Airport, like a very downsized version. We have a cargo train terminal and a train depot, plus 2 subway depots. This is a huge area. It's all right on the water, and our land is very much infill. Much like our proposal, we do have a normal passenger harbor, plus a full cargo harbor, all on reclaimed land. We've got some pretty interesting roadway networks over here off of what was essentially a side highway in the city. And of course, we've got some general industrial area with a bunch of tanks, much like we saw in the real world. Pretty dirty land and very heavy use of concrete all throughout the district. I learned a lot from this process, especially about creating a more realistic type of industrial area, but I want to apply that as we begin to look at today's industrial area. And my game just crashed, so we're going to be back in Veridian County in a more stable world momentarily. Oh, City Skylines. Okay, so we're back, and that crash totally reset all of my game settings, so I had to reset everything. If anything looks weird now, that's why. But I think we're just about ready to get going on creating this industrial district. Having looked at our precedent images, I think I have a pretty good idea of what I want to do over here. I might push back some of this terrain, create an inlet right here for cargo harbor number 1, turn this area into an inlet for cargo harbor number 2, and then we'll have our train lines that snake all the way around through our train depots right here into Grand Central, and maybe some sort of passenger harbor, maybe along this water over here. But I'll bring you back in once I have a little bit more of an idea of where all of our assets are going to be placed. Oh, you hear the sadness? You hear the sigh? Because I plan to bring you in so much earlier. And every bit of footage that I had from bringing you in multiple times over the course of this building process was completely lost. So instead, I'm bringing you into a almost complete industrial district, or at least as complete as we're going to be getting it for this episode. So we'll just have to make do. It's totally fine. Half my episode is gone. That's fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Okay. You can see we've got a lot of boats, and that's because... check it out! Ta-da! We got an industrial district! Okay, so I've actually changed quite a few things about our city, so let's take a look at each of them individually. Let's start at the furthest part from our industrial area. I just connected up this elevated subway station to our modern subway station that's right here in our Marina district. I curved the line out before curving it back in, expecting that our line is going to be running uphill eventually. Slightly closer to Grand Central, we now have the starts for roundabout up at the top of this hill. I brought what's now called Hawthorne Street. Again, City Skylines 2. What an original name. I've never heard you call something Hawthorne Street before. Wow. What's now called Hawthorne Street has been brought through onto the top of the hill. We've added in a Florence Street that's pretty steep and another Hawthorne Street, because naming in this game is fantastic as always, that runs up a little bit more gradually along the waterside to this roundabout. I started to add some of the roads all throughout our East Asian cultural district, including one that kind of uses quay walls and snakes its way up this hill to our city's main telecom tower, plus a couple of roads in kind of an X shape that I eventually want to connect in a little bit more and develop around here, but just the starts of some development right up here on this hilltop. This street grid also centers around yet another small overground subway station similar to the other side. This road grid is a little bit more unique. I have it coming straight out the center of the subway station and branching off into a bit of a triangle, creating some larger parcels. Plus, we'll just place in some alleyways to fill in the grid as we need to. Within this cultural district, we placed down our first buildings, these being the campfire site with a whole bunch of trees. I grew all the trees to maximum. I mentioned this while we were doing our little Google Earth overview, but unfortunately, air pollution direction is flowing directly from our industrial district right into the heart of our old town and our cultural district, because, you know, poor people deserve a whole bunch of pollution, apparently. So I needed to have a little bit of a buffer over here, and you can already see that that's doing a pretty good job at slowing down the pollution. While over here it's a pretty deep yellow, it tapers out to just a very faint color by the time you get into the actual district. We should be lower on the pollution than we were otherwise. Now we get to get into the meat of the district. I'll start off with the Grand Central changes first. I added an elevated subway station right on top over here, and I added a couple pedestrian bridges that connect our central train station to this road that's right up on top of our hill. We're going to develop this hillside district in a future episode, but I started to lay out the frameworks of it as part of this industrial district project, so I thought this elevated subway station would make a pretty good addition to our overall Grand Central station. It would add some of the track capacity that we were hoping we would need. On the other side of Grand Central, we started to create our main transit terminal that we were thinking about for some of our other modes of transit. On two ends, we've got small bus stations. These bus stations are both upgraded with a taxi stop, which you can see on both ends, as well as station services buildings, which I placed on the opposite side of these transit-only streets that the buses can use to turn in and out. I've also created some tram streets that run through here, so this will mainly be a public transit-only area, plus some service vehicles and a few taxis, but the main car traffic will be routed onto the wider Madison Street that connects up to our intersections on either side of Grand Central Station. Posey Street and Ivy Street have our tram lines that connects up from Green Street to Hawthorne Street over here, plus where the tram lines branch off into Ivy Street so they don't conflict with the intersection and so that they're a little bit closer to our overground subway station. Then I've created the custom tram stop right in the middle over here with a little bit of a center platform, plus two plazas on either side that I'm eventually going to detail up a little bit more once we start to add the tram routes into this area. With these changes, Grand Central Station is looking a lot more in its place. We've still got the tunnels, we've still got the tram connections, we've started to think about all the subway connections that are leading in and out of it, but this is feeling a lot more final. So now it's time to move on to the actual industrial district work that we've got. First things first, I've got a transformer station right here next to Grand Central because I have a new interchange. This interchange is mainly to connect up Hawthorne Street at the Old Town to our main highway area, and I've done some kind of funky things over here. In order to make that right turning movement into Dean Highway, I didn't think that it made sense to have it come straight down over here, because that would be a somewhat steep grade change and you'd be entering straight into the tunnel like that. Plus we'd be expanding this quay wall into what's now the transformer station. And while I did, I made this problem for myself, so I can't complain. I made this problem, but I didn't want to infringe on the transformer station, so I didn't want to have any sort of entrance lane over here. So rather than doing the easy thing and just having this turn into there, I did the craziest thing you could imagine. I have this road come under an elevated segment, loop around, and then curve up onto this chaos of a road. So you got cars that are going straight on two sides, but then the opposite direction down the middle. I definitely think that I'm going to need to add some concrete barriers to this at a later date, but I haven't got to do that quite yet. It's a little bit chaotic right now, but once we have barriers in, it'll make a little bit more sense. but just the whole concept of it is wild, and the way that it loops around like this is just so satisfying. It feels kind of urban, it's all elevated, it's great. Next, we've got our subway lines. Our subway lines, as mentioned, curve into this elevated section, but we've also got a little bit of an intersection over here, connect up to there, and they also all circle back in some way or another, whether it's coming from this uphill segment right in, or coming from the Grand Central segment right in. They come and merge into our subway yard. Yes, our subway yard. It's not actually upgraded quite yet, but we could pretty easily install this upgrade. You can see I've already got the track connections all prepared out for that. They're just blocked off right now. But our subway yard is now placed right along the waterfront, and it all connects up pretty nicely, this whole area. Oh, we got our first traffic on this segment. I love it. I'm so happy with this. I love to see traffic in this game. Now, the next piece of our industrial area is our rail yard. Comes right out of Grand Central. All of the lines then connects up to of these three, that's right, 3 parallel tracks that we've got going on here. This is a super dense train area, so I thought it was fitting to have a whole lot of parallel tracks right there with just a couple of cross-track connections that are just 1 track wide. Everything then branches off and connects up with our rail yard right over here. You've got that 1 track that branches into the 2 main ones over here, plus your inner track that kind of serves as the branching off point for all of these rail connections on both ends of the rail yard. Your inner track is where everything is branching in and out. Placing these rail yards required me to move our highway. What I ended up doing is pushing that highway all the way back, right as far back as I could get along this cliffside. We had a little bit of a natural tree buffer here already, so I just embraced that as we have our highway finally making its way over these train tracks and snaking its way down, back down to ground level right next to this trees, so that we have a little bit of a natural buffer from any of the pollution of the industrial area. These highways then come underneath. They reduce in lanes from the 3 that we've had all through downtown to just 2 lanes as we have our first intersection into the industrial area. Here we have Thornton Street, which links up to our hilltop area, and it's probably going to be a pretty major road that runs straight through this whole area. But we got Thornton Street as our first intersection. It's pretty typical, nothing really special for an overpass interchange. Continue through our industrial area to this roundabout. This is something that I'm going to be developing further on as we figure out what to do with Cooper Highway in future episodes. From there, we get to our second main interchange, and this one was a little bit more crazy for 2 reasons. 1, our highway needed to neck up and elevate again over these rail lines because we have a lake here now. I noticed that the terrain was coming down, do it naturally below the sea level over here, so I decided to fill this area up with a little bit of a lake that sets the scene for our national park that we're going to be having over here. But that meant that my rail lines were kind of constricted. So these rail lines instead just curve right along the lake, and the highway, instead of going over the lake, has to go over the rail yards. So the highway again elevates, and I redirected it from the outside of this hill to the inside of it. There was a little bit of a natural channel over there, so I did a little bit of blasting. You can see with the retaining walls, I blasted out both sides a little bit, and our highway now continues up, elevates slowly and naturally over the rail lines and into this elevated segment before continuing on to something that we're going to need to develop in a future episode because, you know, this isn't realistic yet. Our interchange also needs to be elevated as it goes over these rail lines and over our roads that are going beneath it. So our main road gets elevated pretty high up so that it's kind of at the level of the highway and everything, and our interchange then needs to make up this grade from the lower segment all the way up to here. So we've got some pretty long ramps, and this one had to be an overpass at just the right angle so you can still clear the highway there. If it was a little bit closer up like I would have wanted it to be, then it wouldn't have had enough clearance underneath. And here you have your pretty typical trumpet interchange just with a really long ramp over here to clear the grade. Next up, we definitely got to talk about this infill land. Do you remember the old waterfront kind of continued? Had a hill right over here, a small island right there, and this was a whole big open bay? Yeah, that's all gone. Yeah, I totally took the terrain tool to it and I flattened everything out, clearing out some of the land in each of these areas to create a little bit more natural of harbors, and using that again to fill out some of this infill terrain so that it pokes out a little bit more, and in the process creating these much more secluded areas for our cargo ships to be docked and safe from the waves of the main water. You can see that the inlets to all of these are somewhat narrow and they're protected in some way from the water, so this really serves as a barrier for the waves, and I think it turned out pretty well. In between these, we had this pretty nice sized piece of land, so I just put the incineration plant there and drew some roads around it. But this incineration plant wasn't enough to replace our old coal power plant, so I kept that right over here next to the cargo harbor on this little bit of a peninsula that we got. I put our coal power plant plus a battery station, so we've got a little bit of a power section over here, and then I put a whole bunch of trees, again, as that barrier for pollution. And our coal power plant plus this incineration plant meant that we needed some high voltage power lines. So if we look at our electricity info view, you can see I drew those high voltage power lines from the small coal power plant and the incineration plant right over our main Briar Rose Street interchange and ran them right along the coastline in a little bit of a gap between the coastline road and our yards. And I ran them all the way through our interchange to the transformer station that we have here at Grand Central. So now we just got some pretty cool power lines that add to the height of this interchange and add to the height of this whole industrial area. You can definitely see that I do still have a whole bunch of wind turbines. Honestly, these are temporary. It doesn't make sense to have them in the middle of a field like this on some flat land rather than on top of a hill or in the water or something. Don't want them here, but eventually we're going to be building a whole huge nuclear power plant. And that's going to be a project for a future episode. For now, we just have some wind turbines to make up the power difference that we need. Last few things. We got our water treatment plant right here on the water. Kind of makes sense. We have a few upgrades to them that I wanted to have. We have our passenger harbor right here on the water, further from all the rest of the industrial uses and closer to what I think is eventually going to be an amusement park of sorts. So it kind of makes sense to have that as our connection over here. Plus, it's somewhat close to this national park that we'll have. We have our cargo train terminal, which serves as the end for this third track that we have running all the way through from downtown. Third track runs through here, through the rail yard, past all the cargo harbors, and then eventually into this cargo train terminal, where everything branches out with this kind of cool and not functional at all curves. Those two lines that we have remaining after the cargo train terminal then round the corner by this hill and snake their way into our local train station. One of those lines is the passenger line that actually stops in there, while the other line is just the bypass line for any of the cargo trains that will continue, and they then continue right over this bay. This is a pretty shallow bay, so it kind of makes sense to think of them as mud flats of sorts. This is something that was done in the history pretty commonly. If we look at this old map of Seattle, it's kind of really hard to recognize because of how much infill land was created. This is where that Harbor Island is that we were looking at earlier. This is all infill land as well. That's now our SoDo, which is our industrial district. This is where Pioneer Square is. You can see all the brick buildings that are made up there and our first piers. But one of the things you can notice is that we actually have these train lines that run right across the mud flats of this whole more muddy, shallow area. A whole bunch of just shallow train lines. You can even see a little train right there that just run on stilts right across this water as if it wasn't even there. Really impressive engineering. I love it. So we're taking a little of inspiration with that as we run it through this bay. Not as dramatic as the Seattle ones, but still pretty cool. Here we have a road maintenance depot, which is something that we just really needed. We've only got 3 vehicles in use, but I expect this is going to go up a lot. Then we have our taxi depot, which I've upgraded with the dispatch center, as one must do. But we've got plenty of room for garage extensions, which I made sure that we would have right outside the back and along the side. There's room all along the property. You can expect that the taxi depot has bought this whole thing and plans to use it for expansion, but they just haven't gotten around to it yet. Finally. I know I've been explaining for what feels like forever. Finally, we have the actually industrial portion of the industrial district. I've kind of been circling around it this whole time as we've been talking, but we've got this interchange over here that fuels our main road, Thornton Street, that snakes its way through the district, and I just built a couple of grids off of that in this semicircle of the highway and just filled it all out with a whole bunch of industrial areas. I made sure that this industrial area is really high on concrete and that there's a whole bunch of parking all throughout here, whether it's parking lots in the buildings or just separate small little tiny parking lots that fuel this whole area. You've got enough storage, warehouses, and somewhat clean industry besides just a couple of small smokestacks, so it kind of makes sense for a little bit of a downtown industrial area. Kind of on the small side, but it'll do for now. Now, the last thing I do want to do within this episode is detail this rail yard. Here we've got this more concrete-y subway yard, which kind of makes sense since it's closer to the industrial area and closer to this more concrete-y, trashy downtown Grand Central train line area that we got over here. But I want our subway yard to feel a little bit more green, more brownish, so we still get some concrete feel, of course, feeling a little bit more brown, and this whole area needs to be detailed up a lot more. I'm not going to do all of the detail for this area in today's episode. There's obviously still a whole lot of empty spaces that need to be filled in at some point, and we're not quite ready for that yet. There's no demand for industry right now. But I'll at least detail the rail yard. That's the least I can do. So let me just get on that. I'll be right back. And there we are. That's pretty good. We've still got a whole bunch of concrete areas that web their way in between these tracks and kind of fill out the whole area in little webs. But we've kept some of this greenery. We've turned it a little bit brown. It's kind of unkept, somewhat dead, more dirt than actual grass. But hey, we've kept some of these areas and I think they're pretty good. I've even put in some fake shipping containers just to fill up this region a little bit more, and I think it makes sense. I think it looks good overall. I'm pretty happy with the connections that are coming into both our rail yard on this end and our subway yard on this end. But our subway yard turnaround over here, at first, to me, and probably to most of you, just looks so weird. So I want to prove myself. I have to prove myself. I'm going to show you all why I made this decision. And it's because I was looking at our Seattle operations and maintenance facility for our trains over here. Now this is light rail, so they're more similar to trams in that they can do a tighter turning radius a little bit easier. But generally, the consideration and the rationale for this is that the trains and subways in this area are going to be moving a lot slower. They don't need to be going anywhere fast. This isn't being used as a throughput or anything. This is where the trains come and they park. They're going slowly over these roads, slowly all around everybody, slowly into the maintenance facility, and then slowly make their way up onto the actual tracks that enter into revenue service. So I figured my whole turnaround area can be somewhat based off of this, where the different tracks all meet up in a little bit of a straight segment before branching off once again and entering the whole maintenance facility over here. It's nothing crazy, the trains can take it a little bit slower, the radii are still somewhat okay, but they are very tight. You wouldn't want to see this in actual revenue service. This is about the tightest that you want to see in actual service, whereas in here you've got these pretty tight radii that are also single tracked, which is kind of crazy to me, but you know, it makes sense. If you don't have any sort of capacity requirements for this maintenance area, it makes sense. I took that same principle as we brought this into our game. All of our tracks meet up into a little bit of a straight segment and then branch off again as they enter our maintenance facility. With our expansions to Grand Central complete and our industrial area in a pretty good state, it's time to move on to expanding our farming areas. This is a process that we started way back in episode 1, and it's something that I think adds a whole lot of character to our overhead view of the city. Effectively, what we've done is we've created all these individual parcels all throughout this terrain that can be filled up with different farms all around. I didn't really show you how I created these farms in the first episode, so I think we'll spend just a couple minutes showing you how to start them right now. I won't do all of them on camera, but I'll do maybe just a couple. The first step is, of course, to look at our natural resources map. You can see that all across this island, I've got an abundance of land fertility, which is great for resources like cotton, wheat, and vegetables, although livestock doesn't need it. I don't have any oil deposits on this land, but I do have a whole bunch of ore deposits, especially in the more mountainous areas, and I don't want to build all these flat terrains right onto the mountain areas because it's going to kind of hide them. But we do have some pretty good ore deposits, so I might take over a couple of them. Plus, we've got a few stretches of forest that I might want to buff up and turn into some sort of wood farming industry. Basically, what I do is I take a look at each of these individual squares and I determine what resources on them the most. For example, over here, it's a pretty good fit, a wood farming industry. I might take this corner of it into a wood farm or maybe the whole plot. While over here, it's mostly some sort of fertile land. I'm going to pick something like maybe grains, and then I just pick one of these 4 sides to place it on. Then using my snapping, I'll just draw that out to fill the entire square. Sometimes I might only do a quarter of the square or half the square if I want to add a little bit more interest to it, like say something like this, but oftentimes I'll just fill out the whole square because it's pretty easy. Then I'll come into my surfaces tab, and looking at our miscellaneous surfaces, I have a whole bunch of colored surfaces right over here, and I'll take a look at my basic set of black. I can pick from a number of these darker surfaces that I'll just draw somewhat roughly over the top of each of these farming areas. It doesn't have to be perfect because these are mostly meant to be viewed from above, but it'll definitely help give them a little bit more visual distinction since otherwise they all have the exact same texture. Now if I don't like any of these, I can obviously just swap them out using the area bucket mod's replace tool, but it just adds a whole lot more visual interest and character. So now these look like 2 different farms rather than an endless swath of the same color of wheat fields. Lastly, what I'll do is I'll enter the advanced line tool and I'll pick my straight line mode. I'll select my deciduous trees and make sure my ages are both mature and elderly trees, and I want to place these in a fence mode so that we get a nice clean line. I can mix these up between deciduous trees and evergreen trees. For the most part, I'll do deciduous trees just because they have a little bit more color, but I'll do a couple of passes over this, both with the deciduous trees and the evergreen trees, and that'll create these pretty nice borders for me right around any of the farm property lines. This is done pretty often in real life too because it creates kind of a wind barrier and distinguishes between any property lines that the farmers have. So now when I come down to street level, I have these nice tree-lined streets that have fences on both sides, farms on both sides, and just little farming entrances. Now I could be putting a lot more care into this. I could be making sure that all of these entrances are cleaned up. All of these have a little bit of a boundary. I could be getting rid of the fences wherever I wanted to. But frankly, again, this is just meant to be viewed from above, and it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be enough that it convinces me that there's a nice amount of farming over here, and it produces what we need it to. There are a couple of areas that have pretty good stone mining possibilities. So if I look over here, I can see that this area right here, kind of at the foot of this hill, is probably a pretty good mining area. So I might turn something like this into a quarry of sorts. And just like our other farming area, I might just draw in a couple of surfaces over here just to give my quarry a little bit more depth. Although I don't think this looks as good, it's something that I'll experiment with a little bit more. Now that we know how it works to create these farming areas, let's look at how it looks when this whole district is transformed. Just like this. Ta-da! Check that out. You can see that we've got that fill that we were working on beforehand, plus that ore area. I did try and experiment with the different surfaces, but I just don't think it looks as good as covering up the whole areas like we've got over here. It doesn't make sense to have it going down like that, but hey, I'm glad I tried it, and I think I'll leave it for now, see if it grows on me. But just as promised, we've got our pretty square fields, some of which are only taking up part of the parcel, so that we have this room for all of this forestry industry all around where there were natural forests. Over here, where I said we might take up half the parcel, because you can see where the natural forest is, I just extended it to the whole parcel and added in some pre-planted rows of trees. So you can kind of see this natural forest and then the planted trees, and eventually over time that might switch, less forest, more artificial, something like that. So I put a whole variety of different fields in there, but I follow the same technique as I showed you. Put our street trees down using the line tool, fill out the whole square or part of the square with the farms, and color them in using some different colored surfaces. Pretty easy. And just like that, we've got a pretty cool farming area. Now that we have the farming area complete, it's time for the last segment of this episode, creating our district names. In episode 1 of this series, we planned out the entire map, and I think it's doing a little bit of a disservice to that planning to not have any of that showing up in-game. I do have a little bit of a start here in downtown where I have Old Road Bay, Greater Grand Central, Cultural District, and Old Town, but we have a whole lot more districts than that. We've got a whole ocean, we've got our universities, we've got ideas for names for these different small sister cities, we've got thoughts for the airport, and of course all of these mountain peaks. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pencil in the names of these districts a little bit more, see where we end up. Okay, I've started to make a little bit of progress over here. You can see that there's a whole lot more districts all around here now. None of them have names, they're all pretty generic. But if we just look at our districts tool, you can see that we're starting to fill in the entire map with districts. Now, this is still just a start. I still have a whole lot more naming to do, filling in the rest of this, but we've started to get some of the names in there. Like Downtown Brightwater is there. Misty Springs Amusement Park, it's a working name, I promise. But Misty Springs Amusement Park with their train station and harbor of its own, right over there. Old Road Bay and some of these downtown areas, as promised. Downtown Lemuria, I want to actually add some names to this, like the Marina District and maybe some other stuff through there. Our jail and our welcome area, those both have their own districts now, although of course we're going to need to be naming those as well. And there's a few more areas that I want to fill in momentarily. So let me be right back with you in a second. And we're back. Okay, slight spoiler. My episodes are overlapping a little bit. I got a little distracted, I got a little carried away, started working on the next episode, so I had to hide a couple things here and there. Eagle-eyed viewers might get a little bit of a sneak peek of the next episode, and it's so excited. I promise it's going to be amazing. I'm really excited for it. I'm having a lot of fun making it. Anyway, if you see something that doesn't look like it did a few seconds ago, don't pay attention to it. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong. Everything's great. Yep, there's no problems. Okay, I have districts in across the entire playable area. This is amazing. Now I can actually start to assign services, and of course all the boundaries are still going to be adjusted eventually. Like this Catcher City boundary kind of just pokes out into the middle of the ocean. Verdant Village has this kind of weird loopy tail thing, so it's not perfect. But we do have the starts of all of these different areas. Of course, I've named the Prison Isle and the Statue's Landing. We've still got all of our downtown districts of Old Town, the East Asian Cultural District, Greater Grand Central, and our Stadium District and Bay. But now we've also got the Waters District because we have this pond here and of course the access to the open water. We have the Central Business District, which are kind of these central blocks right here. Marina District, because there's going to be a marina right there. Nodo for north of downtown. Then we've got Western Heights, which is a little bit up because it's on a slightly elevated plateau, so it's west of downtown, so it's Western Heights. You've got Uptown, Civic Center, a golf course that we're going to be building on top of the landfill over here. Some beaches, University District, more beaches that I need to find the names of. industries in these areas, Porto Solana, which is one of our sister cities, Santa Endos, which is kind of like Porto Solana. I don't know what language these are in. I'll figure it out. Italian? Spanish? Something like that? I don't know. Santa Endos, Point Croc, because it kind of looked like a crocodile. Borda Village, because it's, you know, it's on the Borda. Borda Village. Borda? Get it? No? Okay. Innovis, which is our future village, Metro Town kind of type of thing. The Universal District, which is going to be our spacecraft space district. The town of Olympus. Miner Square, because there's all this mining industry over here. Florence Island, Lemuria Gardens, which is going to be our like national mall type of thing. Veridian International Airport, love that. We've got, spoilers for our future episode, Stardew Valley. That's right, spoilers. And then we have our biggest of all, National Park, huge district right on the edge of the map that has this little peninsula, plus some of our tallest mountains. Yes, you'll actually notice that I do have the heights listed over here for some of our peaks. Essentially, I started from downtown and I took our terrain tool. If you look at our target height section while we zoom in, we're at roughly 0 feet when we're at sea level, so I can use that to see how high up any of our different points are. So I started from downtown and began to work my way outwards. I started with Valley Hill, and when I clicked up here, I see 293 feet, so 294 feet, pretty close. We've got a 1369 over here, plus an 1135 in Stardew Valley, a 1355 in Martha's Marshes National Park, you know, because it's all marshy over here, so it's Martha's Marshes. And the highest of all is Bedford State Park, way back in the far corner of our map, right above our farming area. You go to the very tip top over here, you get to 1,938 feet, which is just absurdly high up. Everything is starting to have names, and if you have any thoughts on any of these names, please do let me know. Most of these are placeholders right now. I'm not committed to any of them, but you know, it's a good start. Now that we have all the districts complete, we've filled in this farming area, and we've created our industrial district, it's time to call out the episode with some cinematics. I'm starting to get the hang of these cinematics. Honestly, I think this is turning out really well. I'm very excited. I love this. Today's episode was pretty good. We made a lot of progress, although I did lose a whole lot of recording time, and then I just rambled on and on. I wish it could have been a little bit more interactive with me bringing you in each time I made some change to the industrial district, but hey, it happens sometimes, and I think we did pretty well regardless. I had a ton of crashes too, which just made the whole process even more infuriating. The problem is that I love this game too much. I can't stop playing just because it's so unstable, but oh my goodness, it crashes so much and it's just infuriating sometimes. Either way, I think our industrial district turned out really well. I'm loving all the new services that we have in here. It's totally draining our budget dry, but I just love how it looks. I think it's pretty good progress. And I love how this new farming expansion feels. It just helps out the whole vibe a whole lot. With all this progress, I'm having a whole lot of fun on these episodes, and as I mentioned, I've already started work on the next episode, which if that doesn't tell you that the next episode is going to be exciting and that I'm excited for it, then I don't know what does. I'm super excited to keep playing this series. I hope you're enjoying this series as much as I am, and I thank you all for the positive reception on it. With all that said, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all very much. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.